And we are live. It's the Revved Up 906 podcast, a Detroit Pistons podcast, to be exact. And I'm Hudson.
And I'm Ryan.
And before we get into tonight's recap of the Detroit Pistons versus the Brooklyn Nets, I want to remind you guys of a few things. I want to make sure to remind you guys to support Grind Clothing Co. and our partnership with Grind Clothing Co. They are our official merch sponsor. And in the last couple of weeks, I know that we've been promoting and some of you guys have been supporting, but we have our newest drop called Protect the Ball. So we have crew necks, sweatshirts, and t-shirts in the protect the ball font. And then also we have beanies and little bags for sale too on our Grind Clothing Co. banner, rather website. And so click the link in our YouTube bio or in the description below this video, and you can get a one-on-one look with our designs collabed with Grind Clothing Co. So make sure to support Grind Clothing Co. by following them on Instagram and check out some of their designs they have also, because they have a lot of drops almost every month. So make sure to support Grind Clothing Co. Also, if you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. And if you like our content, please hit that thumbs up button to support your favorite Detroit Pistons podcast, Revved Up 906. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's recap of the Detroit Pistons versus the Brooklyn Nets. Tonight's final score was 118 to 112 in the Brooklyn Nets' favor. Ryan, tonight's game was quite the bout. A lot of ups and downs for the team and for the fans. But when talking about tonight's game, the Pistons were really resilient. But to start tonight's recap, I want to talk about Cade Cunningham. We saw Cade get 4 points in the first half and then follow up the second half with 37 points, I believe, maybe 39. He had a great second half. Cade is really not the reason the Pistons are losing right now. He's definitely a shining light for the Pistons.
Yeah, the first half bugged me a little bit because it's like, ooh, 4 points from Cade. This may not go so well. But at the same time, we weren't playing bad in the first half at all. Our first quarter, but my goodness, has to be the best quarter of basketball we've ever played early on this season. It wasn't until the second quarter that we fell off a bit. But still, like, Cade was a big factor in our run earlier in the first quarter. The ball movement was a big key in that. And then you saw in the second quarter, he was still doing his thing. It was just on the quieter end. And then it wasn't like until halftime where he's like, okay, I got to flip a switch. And then that's what happened. I mean, when you have 41 points on the night after starting the game in the first half with 4, like, that shows you how good of a player Cade Cunningham is. And so, like, 15 of 21 from the field, no complaints there. 3 of 4 from 3, and then 8 of 10 at the line. He was shooting very efficiently tonight, all night long, 37 minutes. He never sat. In the games, in the times in which he could have sat, he never sat. He pretty much played the entire game tonight. And so the fact that even in the late stretches of the third quarter, early stretches of the fourth, all the way through to the end, he was out there working his tail off, and it was evident tonight.
Yeah, you briefly mentioned it before that in the second quarter, the Pistons had 6 turnovers and were outscored by 13. With Cade's great play in the second half, I really think that second quarter shot the Pistons in the foot. If they were able to keep the score within 5 or so in that second quarter, I think this game looks differently. I think that the Pistons don't break the NBA record for most consecutive losses with 27. I think they snapped this losing streak if that second quarter wasn't so drastic.
Yeah, and truthfully, like, our fourth quarter, as questionable as it could have been, at times, like, Brooklyn only outscored us by 3 points in the fourth quarter. Like, that's not bad at all. And it wasn't the only quarter that really hurt us was the second. I mean, when they beat us 36 to 23 in the second quarter alone, that's what hurts. Our ball movement just kind of took a dip. We were trying to get a little too flashy at times, and some of our shot selection, it just it wasn't like what we should have been doing at times. Um, but that's what happens when you start off the game as hot as you do. There's usually a dip. So somewhere at some point there is a dip, and it was the second quarter for us tonight.
Well, and it's kind of interesting because the Pistons proved they can compete against middle of the pack teams like the Brooklyn Nets. We saw them start 7-0 in the first minute in the third quarter, led by Cade. And so there was these certain runs and scoring streaks throughout the game and throughout four quarters that the Pistons had that showed that the Pistons can get consecutive, shots up and shots made against solid 500-esque teams. So that's why there's a couple shining lights from tonight's game that you have to kind of pick apart and kind of dissect, because yes, the Pistons are the worst team in the NBA right now, but with a couple pieces that you attach to the overall puzzle, I think this team figures it out. And I think with the look of Cade Cunningham, Bojan Bogdanovic, and Jalen Duren all on the court together, it really makes this Pistons team have a little bit more fullness to the roster. And speaking of Jalen Duren, we saw his return due to his injury. He was out since December 6th. And in his return, he didn't really disappoint. I really was happy with his play. Jalen Duren tonight gave us 12 points, 15 rebounds, 4 assists, 6 of 11 shooting, and then I believe 1 steal and 1 block. So making an impact on the defensive end right away too. Jalen Duren was the biggest reason we played so well in the first quarter. In the first 6 minutes of the game, Jalen Duren got 6 rebounds. So that's a third shining light from tonight's loss is Cade's great play. I forgot the second one. I talked about a second one. And then the third one is Jalen Duren. Jalen Duren throughout this season has shown us that he's got shines of being one of the next great centers of today's NBA.
Yeah, truthfully, I think Jalen Duren is the player of this game tonight. It's kind of bold given the fact that Cade had 41, and then had a phenomenal stat line that he had tonight. But I think Duren is the player of the game. When you look back recently, before Christmas there, we played Brooklyn, in Brooklyn, and that game we were missing Duren. We were missing a certain player. And when you have Nick Claxton, when you have Royce O'Neal, Sharp, like these guys hit the glass hard. And when you only have Stu and Wiseman, it's not going to cut it. And it was evident because Jalen Duren comes back, gets those 6 boards right away, and then like here we are, finishes with 15. At 15, and then you have Claxton 11, Dorian Finney-Smith 4, Day'Ron Sharp 11, Royce O'Neal 2. Last time out, those 3 guys alone out rebounded Stu and Wiseman. And so like the fact that you had Duren back get us 15 boards, like it shows you how big of a threat he is on the glass, but then also like how big of an impact player he is. And I really think in the future, I mean, everybody's been comparing Duren to like a mini Dwight Howard and whatnot, but I think Duren is in his own class. Like he's his own player, because he's doing stuff that Dwight Howard never was able to do in terms of offense. Right. And then he's doing some things on defense that Dwight Howard was never able to do. I think Duren is just in his own class, and because we haven't seen this type of productive player in Duren that we've seen in years past. And maybe I'm just biased a little bit because he's a Pistons player, but I really think Duren is in his own class, and I think he's the player of this game, and a big reason why it was as close as it was.
Usually in every Detroit Pistons matchup, the opposing top 3 players outscore their normal averages for points per game. We saw Zach LaVine give us 51 or something like that. And a couple other guys, every star on the opposing team's player always goes over and above on their points per game. But tonight with the Detroit Pistons, they kept the Brooklyn Nets each player right around their averages. We didn't let Mikal Bridges go off for 35. Cam Johnson scored a lot of big time threes in inopportune moments, but really he only put up 24 points. It wasn't like he went off for 41 like Cade did. So I kind of give the Pistons props a bit because they didn't let these premier scorers, these big time 3-point shooters, go off for 45, 35. They kept them hovering right around their averages, kind of kept them to mediocre play, didn't let them completely go off. And I think the Pistons, I think that means they're kind of coming around on the defensive end a bit. And that's definitely another positive from tonight's matchup.
Yeah, I think it was the complementary players that really killed us tonight for the Nets. You look at some of the guys in double digits. Day'Ron Sharpe, 11. Dorian Finney-Smith, 11. Cam Thomas,
Right.
17. This is no disrespect to Nick Claxton, but offensively, he is a complementary player. He had 11. Spencer Dinwiddie, 9. Royce O'Neal, 8. Dennis Smith Jr., 6. Like, there's a lot of these guys on the Nets that shouldn't have been as productive as they were offensively, and that's what hurt us. In the late stretches, Dorian Finney-Smith killed us. Late stretches, Day'Ron Sharpe killed us. Dennis Smith Jr. had some clutch shots earlier on in the third quarter that ended up continuing on their streak. Royce O'Neal hit those huge shots when it mattered absolutely the most to them winning this game and closing it out.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, if it weren't for the complementary guys on this team, this game would have been won by the Pistons. And that's what hurts us the most. But I will say my one negative in that too, in our defense, because our defense was pretty darn good tonight compared to what it has been. My one big negative is closing out shots. Because you have Royce O'Neal there, you have Cam Johnson, you have Dorian Finney-Smith, you have these guys hitting big shots when it matters the most, and there's nobody around them at all. You have Cade jumping out to contest, but he really isn't there. You have Bojan slowly stomping his way out because he's slow, but he's slowly getting there to contest a shot. You're having just all these guys slowly get to their spots to contest a shot. And when you have good shooters, I'm not saying Royce O'Neal is like cream of the crop, one of the best shooters in the league. I'm not saying that. He can shoot, though. Did I just say Royce O'Neal? Yeah. Dorian Finney-Smith, same way. But Cam Johnson is the shooter out of the group. So when you're not closing out on the shooter, bad things are going to happen. The same thing happened with Bojan tonight. Bojan, at opportune times, wasn't getting a closeout shot on him, and he was hitting those threes. But then all of a sudden they started closing out. We'd miss. They'd start closing out on Alec Burks. We'd miss. Cade, we'd miss. So Brooklyn took advantage of that tonight, whereas we sat back, worked on the paint, guarding the paint and defending the paint, whereas our closeout defense, it was nowhere to be seen. If we could close out shots, this game, I honestly think we would have won just off that alone in the late stretches of the fourth quarter tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. The not closing out on the 3-point shots was just absolutely killer to the Detroit Pistons. And I noticed it happen a couple times too to Isaiah Stewart and previous games. Bojan and Isaiah Stewart and Cade are notorious for not closing out on 3-point shooters. And that's a lot of the time why we get scorched from the 3-point line. It's an absolutely brutal thing to watch because as a fan, you're just like, oh, it's like so frustrating when it happens 4 or 5 times in a quarter. It's just so hard to watch. Something else that I noticed when dissecting the box score is usually when we're recapping games, the Pistons are hovering around 20 to 22 turnovers a game. But tonight they had 13, which for the Pistons is not bad. But about half of these turnovers came in very inopportune times in the fourth quarter that kind of set up the Brooklyn Nets for a win. But then also there were silly turnovers, like the one with Cade with the 24-second violation. And there's a couple where Bojan just kind of threw it to the opponent. So that was a point that I kind of wanted to make, that the Pistons are slowly decreasing some of these negative statistics, which is great. But then also it's kind of showing a difficulty to the Pistons because they're doing it in such terrible moments, in crucial moments in the game. I'm hoping that with losing games like this to the Brooklyn Nets, it makes them smarten up a little bit, makes them learn through time that they have to protect the ball in these crucial moments, because otherwise this losing streak is just going to continue, and it's about to get tougher because Thursday night we play the Boston Celtics.
Yeah, and truthfully, this team from the start of the losing streak till now, the start you saw a team that completely gave up, that aren't showing any energy at all, would just go in there, do their thing, hoping to win, but then they just lose. The last couple nights out, especially tonight, we've seen a completely different team. We're seeing a team that wants to win, that wants to compete, that is bringing the energy.
Oh, and when it comes down to it, it comes down to the fan support, because we know that these young guys, I mean, we're 21, 22. We understand how tough it is when you get criticism, especially from the people that are supposed to be your support staff. So guys like Cade, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren's only 20 years old. He's just a kid. We gotta stay true to the end and see it through and stay and support the Detroit Pistons, bleed the red and blue. And we got to keep doing it until the Pistons are a playoff caliber team and one day chasing that trophy. That will do it for tonight's recap of the Detroit Pistons versus the Brooklyn Nets. Before you guys leave, I want to make sure to remind you guys to watch this week's episode that was just posted on Saturday, episode number 9. We talk about potential Detroit Pistons trades, and some guys that are highlighted are John Collins, PJ Washington, and former Detroit Piston Jeremy Grant. So if you want to hear all these potential trades, make sure to tune into this week's episode. We will see you guys in the next Revved Up recap of the Detroit Pistons versus the Boston Celtics. Peace.